All righty. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're at. Where I'm at, it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I get to say good afternoon. Hopefully everybody can see my screen there. I'm going to pull this chat over here and we will get started. So I am running Kali Linux 2022.2 VirtualBox system. I'm also running in the background a Windows 7 and a Windows 11 system. And I'll give you guys a little bit of time to catch up. I'm going to go to the next slide and let me go ahead and start from beginning. So we're going to do ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, but we're going to take it in a different direction. Usually everybody does ARP and they say, hey, this is how ARP works and everything, but I'm more on the cybersecurity side. So we're actually going to take advantage of it. We're going to, I don't want to say hack it, that's the wrong word, but we are going to take advantage of the basic principles or the basic vulnerabilities that ARP has to offer. And we're going to kind of do a man-in-the-middle attack using a virtualization system today. So if you want to follow along, I provided these codes for you. We have VirtualBox. I provided a bit.ly code for that. Kali Linux for their website. And then I've got Windows 7 and Windows 11. I believe those are off my Google Drive. So don't be surprised if you end up in a Google Drive and you can start downloading those. So I'll leave those up there while I introduce myself. My name is Chester Kendrick. I am an instructor here at Flatiron. I've been in cybersecurity and IT since '94. And you can probably tell the loss of hair proves that, right? So I've been doing information security before it was called cybersecurity, and then information assurance, and then IT. I've done military with the United States Army is when I got started in this whole great field of study. And then I earned my master's in cybersecurity through a university. And then I'm currently working on my PhD in information technology with an emphasis in information security as well. So I started off in the Army in '94 and then got off active duty in 2000, did the National Guard for a little while, worked for companies such as T-Mobile, AT&T, another couple mom and pop shops. And then recently I transitioned from the Army to the Navy from the Army. And yeah, I could put those links in chat. Let me get out of this real quick. Let me see if I can go back a slide. Let me see if it'll let me grab all these. It will. So I will put those in chat for you. Probably easier that way, right? There we go. So that's a little bit about me. Obviously, I've been doing this for a little while. I got into teaching about 2019. I stopped working for AT&T and then really got into it. So I'm going to move along, but most of it's lecture, a little bit on the Kali side, but feel free to follow along. And of course, I believe that Catherine said that she would be providing you these slides after the fact. So yep. IP addresses. I'm sorry. Yeah. So Catherine's going to provide that. So IP addresses or Internet Protocol address is a series of numbers. And it identifies any device on a network. We should all know what an IP address is. Most of you guys know this, right? Most of our internal networks that are residential areas start with a 182. If you're in an enterprise network, a lot of times you'll see a 10 network or even a 172 network. Those are pretty popular. And of course, we have IPv6, which that's a whole nother story, right? So we're going to keep it to IPv4. But we know that computers use IP addresses to communicate with one another. That process is usually done using a protocol called DHCP, which allows the server or the router, depending on where you're getting it from, to automatically identify or dish out the internet protocol that your computer is going to use. So today we need to know what IP addresses we're on. So I'm going to do this in Kali first, and then we'll do it in a Windows system second. So here I've got my Kali. For those that don't really understand Linux, this is a basic Linux operating system. This rendition of Linux is called Kali. This is what penetration testers and cybersecurity mostly use on the Linux platform. There are other ones out there. There's Parrot, there's Ubuntu. Most people ask, okay, wait a second, which one's best or which one's different or so on. You got to remember that Linux is Linux is Linux. It really kind of doesn't really matter. When you're really talking about Linux, I want you to think about Linux as, okay, is it Windows 7? Is it Windows XP? Is it Windows 10? They're all basically the same if you get into it, right? If you know how to use Windows 7, you know how to use Windows 10. I think Windows 8 is the oddball out there, right? But Linux is just like that. So at the very top of the platform, you can see this little box right here, this little blocks, a little black box. We call that a terminal. Linux is based on command line interface, and that's what we're going to use today. Now, I'm in root. You probably aren't in root for your systems, and I probably should have uploaded the one that doesn't have root access. But root is like the super user of a Linux platform. So some of these commands I'm going to provide you, I'm actually going to tell you to write sudo first. But we will go through and do the regular commands. I'm going to blow up this command line interface so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to type in ifconfig, just like that, ifconfig. That's going to give me my IP addresses. So this 127 IP address, that's the local address or the loopback address, depending on what you want to call it. And then you can see up here, I have an IP address of 10.0.2.15. So that is the IP address of my virtual machine running in Calyx right here. We can see my net masks and then our broadcast address. And then if we really wanted to, we could see all kinds of those other addresses, right? So let's concentrate on this, right? The 10.0.2.15. And then on a Windows system, I can do the same thing, except I'm going to use IP instead of IF. So I have a Windows 7 system here. I like Windows 7, call me old fashioned. To get to that, see where this little command right here, I'm going to type in CMD, and that will bring me up the command prompt. And just like Linux, I can type in a command right there, and I'm going to type in ipconfig. And again, that's going to give me my IP address of my Windows 7, 10.0.2.4. And I have one more Windows system just to show that I can keep up and then I'm not completely old. I'm going to use Windows 11 as well. And it's going to be the same exact command. I'm going to type in CMD, CMD, and it doesn't like me today. There we go, CMD, a little bit lag on my side. So CMD, and I got that command prompt. And I just press enter. And again, ipconfig, and that will give me my IP address right here of 10.0.23. So these are all on the same network because they all start with that 10.0.2. And then we have a subnet between 0 and 255. In my case, this machine right here is operating on a .4. And of course, we have this one on a .23. And of course, my Linux is operating on its own IP addresses. And this IP address is important for each machine on the network to work properly. Now, if I had a router, now this is a virtual network, so it really doesn't have the router going forward on this. The router's built into the virtual machine or the virtual network, right? But for the most part—
Hey, Chester, can I
Yes,
interrupt you
ma'am.
for 1 second? We've
You
got a
absolutely
few
can.
questions. We've got one request to slow down just a little bit. We've got one asking if you can make it any larger for them to be able to see it a little more easily. And then we've got a few questions that I'm not going to understand at all, but I will read to you.
Okay.
The first is, do I need my Kali to NAT or its own DHCP on the network?
Oh, well, that's a good question. So I actually do NAT network. And let me back up a step. Let's answer that question in the proper form. So let me bring up VirtualBox real quick so we are all on the same settings. And I appreciate you bringing that up to my attention because I'm so used to teaching students beforehand that we don't go through this. All right. So here I have virtual. You can see my Kali running right there. I'm actually going to use Chioptrix one because it's not running currently, but the settings are going to be exactly the same throughout the process, right? So I'm going to start from the beginning to set this up. I'm going to assume that you've never seen this before and you're just downloaded your machines, okay? So the very first thing that we need to do is go to File and then Preferences. And I know it's probably hard to see this. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. I don't know if I can on a VirtualBox. Yeah, it's not going to let me, right? But on my VirtualBox system, I'm going to go to File on the top left-hand side. If you're in a Mac system, it's going to be a little bit different. If you're in a Linux system, it's going to be a little bit different, right? But it's going to be File and then Preferences, or Control-G will also get it for you. When you hit Preferences, you're going to get a display that looks something like this. I'm just going to go down to Network, and you can see this little plus button right here on the side. If you don't have anything there, you'll need to press that plus button, and it'll give you a NAT network right there. If you have NAT network already there, then you don't need to really worry about it, okay? Once we have NAT network, just the NAT network, just press OK, and that'll bring us back to it. And of course, I accidentally opened up a new group, which I didn't mean to do, but we're going to go back into Chioptrix level 1. I'm going to hit that settings button. It's going to lag out a little bit, but that's okay. And we're going to set up our systems. Now, all of your systems, it doesn't matter if it's Linux for this exercise or if it's Windows or whatnot, we're going to set them up all the same for the sake of this exercise. Now, if I was going to go through and work on these systems on a normal basis and keep them operational, I would want to tweak these settings. But for the spirit of time today, we're just going to run them all the same, right? So under General, I would go under Systems, Advanced, and you see how I've got that shared clipboard and that drag and drop disabled? That means I can't copy and paste into my systems. I want to be able to do that. So I'm going to press bidirectional right there on the very first one, that shared clipboard. Just under General and then Advanced, Shared Clipboard, bidirectional. Okay, I'm done with General at that point. I'm going to drop down to System. Now you can see under System, that I've got a base memory of only 256 megabytes of RAM. I want a little bit more than that for my Windows systems. They don't do well with that much. I'm going to go and push that up to about 4 gigabytes of RAM. And I can type it in, or I could just drag that cursor. It doesn't need to be exact. Anywhere in there is fine. Okay. Under my pointing device, I'm going to change that to PS2 mouse right there. Now it's probably on tablet. I've already switched it to PS2 mouse before, but I want to make sure it's on PS2 mouse. That's going to give me the ability to actually use my mouse within the system. The rest of that's going to stay as default. I'm going to go to processor. Now with processors, here's the caveat, right? If I'm working on a Windows system, I want 2 processors minimum. On a Linux system, I'm perfectly happy with 1 CPU. The trick is you don't want to go above that 50% mark, because when you're stealing resources from your main machine, you don't want to go too far into that. And you can see that my machine has 8 CPUs maximum. So I'm going to try and use no more than 4 at one time. Now, there are general rules that we'll go into if you were signed up for Flatiron classes to make this a little bit easier to understand. We'll go a lot more in advance into this. But for today's purposes, let's just stick with 1 CPU on our Linux and 2 for our Windows. All right. And try not to go above that. Do you need both Windows 7, Windows 11, and Kali running? Absolutely not. All you need is 1 Linux system and 1 Windows system for today's exercise. So don't run more than you have to. All right. Once we're done with the system, we're going to drop down to network. And if you see what I've got right here, I've already got it set up for NAT, and then I've got NAT network right underneath it for adapter 1. That's all I need to have. Now, if you press NAT network and there's nothing here, then you miss step 1 where that file preferences is ready. Okay. And then at the very last of it, we're going to disable that USB right there. There's no reason to have it. And again, that's specifically for this exercise today. Okay. So once we've got all that, we're just going to press OK, and then we could run or spin up those systems as needed. So I'm going to go back here to our chat because I know there were some more questions in here. Let's see. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. All right. Is it possible to magnify your presentation? I'm doing my best on that one. Let me see if I can magnify it a little bit. Would you recommend WSL2 for Windows or virtual machine? I like virtual machine. I'm biased. I like VirtualBox is what I'm saying, right? So I prefer VirtualBox over the other one. And to be honest, I'm not really sure. I'd have to Google WSL2. Probably makes me sound like a noob, but I'll have to Google that one to be honest. I'm not familiar with that. Let's see. What other questions? Can we write down the note or would we get a recording? I believe that Catherine's going to provide a recording. Everyone receive an email. Yes, She's already answered that. Let's see. If you're running a server, you'll need a static IP address. You should never use DHCP. Otherwise, you'll knock off your clients. Absolutely correct, John. But for the purpose of this exercise, it's really not that important. Dynamic protocol or Lisa. Yeah, absolutely correct. You are 100% correct. Right. It's Windows subsystem for Linux or VirtualBox. Familiar with WSL2? Yeah, it's VirtualBox. To run Linux distros through terminal on Windows 2. To run Linux distros through terminal on Windows 10. I'm not sure what you're asking, Daniel. I apologize. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So we've done VirtualBox. Okay, so let's get back into this. All right, so I've got my Windows 11 and my Windows 7 system. I prefer Windows 7, like I said, but we're gonna move on. All right. Okay, so we've got our IP addresses. That's the important part. Okay, and we know that IP addresses allow our systems to talk to one another. All right, so we have MAC. Now, a MAC address is a unique identifier assigned to a network interface controller or a NIC card that uses a network address and communications with a network segment. This is common use for IE 802 networking technologies, including Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. So what is really a MAC address? You have to remember that each machine in your network has a MAC address, and that's our layer two address when we come down to it. Okay, so when we're talking about machines communicating with one another, they really need to understand what is the IP address and what is the MAC address. And remember, the IP address is for our network and our MAC address is for us to identify our individual machines. So how does this all fly when we're talking about ARP? Well, ARP is Address Resolution Protocol. It's a communication protocol used for discovering the link layer address, such as a MAC address, and associated with a given internet layer, typically an IPv4 address. The mapping is critical function of the Internet Protocol Suite. So we need to understand if I want 2 PCs to communicate with one another, like I have in this little diagram, then we'll have PC2 here, and it's saying, hey, who has 192.168.56.10? And it's sending out an ARP request. And PC1 is saying, hey, that's me. Here's my MAC address. And then that will allow them to communicate together. is ARP IPv4, IPv6, etc. It's both. It's both. We need to be able to talk to both when it comes to ARP. It's more popular in IPv4 for most part. All right. So when we talk about the big picture wise, when we talk about the big picture, we're looking here, right? So we have our router and it's our gateway controller and it's saying, hey, I'm on 192.168.56.1. I'm talking on the internet and I have all these devices connected to me. So I have my PC2, again, just like before, and it wants to talk to PC, or excuse me, I mislabeled them, I apologize. So I have PC over here and it says, hey, I'm on 192.168.56.30. Can I have your MAC address? And it says, I'm PC2. Here's my MAC address right here, and that will allow the two to talk to, right? Very layman's terms, very easygoing when we talked about this. All right, so in order to understand that, what we really need to do is bring up an ARP table. And you can see here that I provided a little bit of direction on this, but let's do it in practice. I'm going to bring up my Linux machine first in terminal. And of course, I need to log back in. And people will tell you, don't ever use root. They're absolutely correct. And I shouldn't be using it, but I should have loaded up another system. So in order to bring up the ARP table in Linux, we're just going to type ARP-A, and it is exactly the same command. Now you can see when I bring up the ARP-A command, it only provides me with two IP addresses, 2.1 and 2.3, and it provides those link addresses. But if we bring up our Windows systems, and I use the same command, ARP-A, we can see that it's not seeing my Linux system. It doesn't have a 2.15 in there, and so it's not providing it. So I need them to talk to one another. I'm just going to do a basic ping, and I'm going to say, hey, oops, wrong IP address. We're going to do ping 10.0.2.15. It doesn't want to type because I don't have numlock on, 10.0.2.15. I'm going to ping that, and it's just going to do a quick ping. And if I rerun that ARP command at that point, you can see now that it's providing that physical address or that MAC address for 10.0.2.15. Okay, and we can see that right there. And now if I rerun it on my Linux system, we can see now that it sees my Windows system at 23. All right, and we're just going to do that again with the Windows 7 system. It's going to quickly ping it. And we're going to do an ARP table. And you can see that it sees 10.0.2.15. Now, I know this one's a little bit harder to see. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. Oh, doesn't let me. Doesn't like me. Okay, so we see the ARP tables. Let me get back to my screen show. And the ARP is allowing those communications or those devices to talk to another, right? All right, so the thing you need to remember about the internet is it was based on an intrinsic trust system. It was designed around the idea that we would share communication with one another and that it would be a free society and that we would be able to talk to one another and that we would share information. And so there really wasn't security embedded into ARP or many of the protocols when the internet was first introduced in the world. And matter of fact, most people didn't ever think that the internet would get up to where it is today. No one really envisioned the internet taking over our society the way it has. And so all of these systems on the networks were built upon this idea of intrinsic trust. So you can kind of see my little cartoon here. Hey, you speak binary too. Doesn't everyone? We're going to be best of friends. Totally, because computers trust one another implicitly. So we can use that trust against the systems, right? So we can use something called ARP spoofing. And when I send ARP spoofing, you have to remember that it's all about that trust. We can use ARP spoofing to take effect of basically pretending to be another machine or to take over the identity of another machine on a network. And we're going to do that today. So here we got our basic outline just like before. And you can see that, hey, our malicious PC comes in. It says, hey, I'm a new PC to the router. And the router says, here's your IP address using DHCP. And I'm going to assign you 192.168.56.99. And he says, okay, great. I appreciate that. So how does the internet really work? When we're talking about the internet functioning in this way, PC2 over here, which is on 192.168.56.30, talks to the router, and the router gives it internet access. And our malicious PC over here at 99, it's doing the same thing. But if we decide to provide a spoof, then we can tell, our malicious PC can tell PC2, I'm the new router, and here's my new MAC address. And because of an intrinsic trust system, it says, thanks for the update. I guess it means that 192.168.56.1 is new PC then. And of course, our malicious PC can say, well, yeah, sure, whatever. And the PC3 is going, you know what? That's great. You're the best ever. And of course, the router says, you know what? This seems legit. That's fine. But what's really happening at that point is PC2 at this point is going to go through our malicious PC to access the internet, which means everything is going to go through our malicious PC in order to access the internet. And we can use this to spoof the IP addresses and do a man-in-the-middle attack. So today we're going to use a program called BetterCap. I'll let you read through this slide, but basically BetterCap is going to allow us to pose as a different PC. We're going to be able to spoof the PCs, and we're going to be able to spoof the network simultaneously, and thereby manipulate the data that's coming in from both sides. So the first thing that we need to do is bring up BetterCap in our Linux system. So I'm going to bring up BetterCap. I'm just going to type in BetterCap right off the bat, go. And you can see that BetterCap, let me reduce this a little bit so we can see everything that's going on. Hopefully you guys can still see that. And we can see that BetterCap is basically asking, hey, what's going on here? Or is everything going well? And we're going to type in the help command. And we can see through the help command what we're running. So we have our event stream, and that's it. That's all that's running currently within the system. I'm going to blow this up. Let me close this down. I'm going to shift over to a live view. And then hopefully we can blow this up so you guys can see it better. Okay. All right. And then we see help command provides us which modules we're running currently. So the first thing we want to do is we want to do a probe. So I'm going to net.probe because I want to know exactly what it does. And it tells me, let me minimize this a little bit. It tells me exactly what the net.probe command does. It says it's not running and keeps probing for new hosts on the network by sending dummy UDP packets to every possible IP address on the subnet. So basically it does a network scan. And then it provides me the parameters. We could do an MDNS right here, which enable MDNS discovery of probes. Default is true. And it basically tells me exactly what I need to do to work on these commands. Because you got to remember, Linux is all about open source software. And so when we're talking about open source software, a lot of times there isn't a written manual. And so these programs provide those manuals for us. So if I want to turn netprobe on, I can do a basic command of net.probe. And I believe the command for that is on. Oops. And we can see it's starting the net recon as a requirement of netprobe. And if I type the help menu, we can see now that it's running net.probe is running and net recon is showing. And if I wanted to, I could do a net.show. And we can see now exactly what's on our network. And it's already picked up. Let me see if I can rerun that command a little bit. There we go. So we can see it's giving me the IP address of 10.0.2.4. It gives me the MAC address, and it provides me and tells me, hey, this operating system is a Windows 7, so on and so forth. Can we get the slides now? That is an answer that Catherine will have to tell you. Whether or not she
I'm working on downloading the deck right now so that I can drop it in. Give me 1 second to figure this out.
Okay. So we have identified a potential target, which is this Windows 7 system. And the next thing we're going to do is a help.arp.spoof, because we want to know exactly what ARP spoof does and all the items to it. And it tells you right off the bat, ARP spoof is keep spoofing selected host on the target. We can start ARP spoofer using the arp.spoof_on command. We can also do an ARP ban command to block all traffic. And then we have our other options available right here. So for the purposes of this exercise, we're actually going to do set arp.spoof.full duplex because we want to do both sides of it. And we're going to set that as true. And the reason I know that's true is because look, arp.spoof.full duplex, if true, both the targets and the gate will be attacked. Otherwise, only the target is. And we want to spoof not just the target, we also want to spoof the router in this case. So we've set that. And again, now we can set our ARP spoof. So set ARP .spoof.targets, and we have to define our targets. Now we know that our gateway, if I remember correctly, is operating on .1, but we can check. I could normally check just by doing Linux, but I'm going to cheat today. I'm just going to use my ARP table from my Windows machine, and we can see 10.2.1 is right there, and we know that we're operating on 10.024. And again, I could do the net show if I needed to, and I'm just going to type that in right there. Now, don't forget the comma. A lot of people forget the comma when we're putting that in there. All right, so I'm going to hit enter, and again, I'm going to do a net.show to see what's going on. Oh, not net.show, help command right there. So we know that our net recon is running. We see our event stream is running, and ARP spoof should be running. It is not. I haven't turned it on yet. I guess it would help if I turn that on, wouldn't it? So we're going to do ARP.spoof on. Now you can see that the ARP spoofer started. It's probing 2 targets. It's in full duplex mode, and we can see all that. So I'm going to do again that help menu to make sure it's running. And here we can see ARP spoof is in fact running. Now, if it's working properly, when I pull up my ARP table in my Windows 7 machine, we should see 2 things. Let me see if I can expand this a little bit. Let me blow it up a little bit. Nope. So we should be able to see our MAC address on 10.0.2.1 change and match our 2.15, right? And the reason it should see it is because we would be spoofing the router right there. So let's find out if that happens. So ARP-A, and here we can see it right here, 10.0.2.5. We can see that it's operating on a 080027. And look at that, exactly the same as 2.1. So we are now spoofing the target for ARP. Okay. Okay, so Catherine has provided you the slides now. So we look at the MAC address. Now let's play with this a little bit more. I'm going to open up. I like Internet Explorer. We're going to type in Internet Explorer, IE Explorer. I'm going to bring up Internet Explorer just because I know it's a little bit less or more vulnerable than Google Chrome. And I'm going to go to Flatiron, if I can type correctly without losing my mouse. We're going to go to flatironschool.com. And it should populate for us. Maybe. It's lagging out a little bit today. All right, so while it's loading up the web page, if it does it properly, we should be able to see exactly what's going on the back end with our CaliBox as we're going through this. And it just hasn't kicked up yet. So let's see what's going on. Still loading, still taking its time. While it's doing that, I'm going to hit another website. I'm going to go to http://unicornitems.com. It's a HTTP unsecure site just to make sure that we got both directions going for us. You can use Kali links with a Windows 7 system. That's not an issue. There we go. Now we see unicorn items popping up. It takes a little bit. I'm stressing my system today, my bandwidth. All right. So if we come into here, we should be able to see that we've spoofed the IP or the MAC address, and we went over there. And normally, if I remember correctly, it should have shown us, but it has been a while. So we could still access the internet right here. You'll have to type in sudo. So you would do sudo bettercap, and it should work for you. Just like that. All right. So we're going to turn off the ARP spoof command. We're going to go through and we're just going to turn it off. So ARP.spoof and then off. And the reason we did that is because it's working and we know that it's working. But let's stop all traffic. We've proven that Windows 7 can access the internet. We can see that it's accessed both of our sites. It just took it a second, right? So we're going to turn it off and we're going to move to an ARP.ban. So if you remember correctly, if we do that help menu right there, we can see, where is it? I believe it was under the ARP command. So if I type in help ARP.spoof, there it is right there. We can put ARP ban on. So we're actually going to put ARP.ban on. So ARP.ban on, and you can see that forwarding is not enabled. And let's go back to that Windows 7 system. And you know what? Let's just hit Flatiron again. I'm going to close that window out. I'm going to just type it in again, flatironschool.com. And if my ban is working correctly, then it should give me an error of no internet access. And we'll give it a few seconds to run through this. Now, there's other commands that we can use as well, which we show when we're going through the exercises in the lab in school, where we actually show you that you can see the web pages pop up. You can see what somebody's browsing. You can see how, or if they're providing an insecure password, if they wanted to log in to unicornitems.com, we could actually see how they're logging in and through a non-secure port and why it's so dangerous. Right, so we've provided that. We've turned off that internet access to that Windows 7 system. So even though Windows 7 has its own access on the virtual network, and for all intents and purposes, it should be going through the router the same as any other things, it's actually going through our Kali box, which we, since we control the ARP mechanism, we can ban all the access to it. So I'm going to turn that back off. And since I've turned it off, I should be now able to access the internet again. And let me bring that back up. And we should be able to prove, yep, our Flatiron School website now works. So you can virtually turn off the IP address. So let's discuss a little bit of how this works, or defensive measures onto ARP spoofing and how to protect against something like this, right? I think I saw somebody already kind of put the answer in earlier today. But there are some defensive strategies that we can use to protect ourselves. More than that, though, let's back up a little bit. When it comes to ARP spoofing, what are scenarios where I would want to be very cautious of this? Obviously, in a virtual environment, I'm doing this to myself. It's not a big deal. If I'm at home, I'm plugged in via an Ethernet cable or even on my own Wi-Fi system. So hopefully I don't have any neighbors performing side-by-side attack and gets access to my router and password, and they'd be able to perform this type of attack if they were on my own internet. But what kind of place would this type of attack be most carried out? Well, Starbucks has free Wi-Fi systems. A lot of businesses have free Wi-Fi systems nowadays. So there's actually interesting stories that came out, I believe in 2016, there was a realtor that was sending off an email to his client with wiring instructions. And because of a man-in-the-middle attack, they were able to delay that email from going out. They changed the wiring access information to a wiring number over in Ethiopia. And then the client sent the wire transfer of something like $35,000 over to Ethiopia. And they sued the realtor because of it, because he was on an open Wi-Fi system at Starbucks and someone had done a man-in-the-middle system. Now, there's a little bit more to that story than just what we provided here, obviously. But it shows you how something like an ARP attack or an ARP spoofing attack could potentially provide a man-in-the-middle scenario like that. So how can we defend against that? Well, we already know for a fact that our Windows 7 system, or even our Windows 11 system, well, I can't use Windows 11 because we didn't spoof that one, but our Windows 7 system provided us our first clue, and that's right here. We have our gateway with a MAC address that matches our 2.15 address. So that's our first clue, right? That's our first clue to understanding if we are actually in the middle of an ARP spoofing attack. James, 100% correct. VPN. Well, VPN encrypts our traffic and provides a tunneling. It would 100% allow us to not be fooled by an ARP system. Or even if we were fooled per se by the ARP system or ARP spoofing, it wouldn't matter because all of our traffic's encrypted. And so that would kind of be a defensive strategy. There is one more thing that we could do that's very obvious in this, and it's actually on this little table right here of how we could protect ourselves from an ARP spoofing attack. Anyone want to take a guess? I'll give you a hint. It's right here. James taking the cake again. Static IP addresses, right? So if you remember correctly at the very beginning of this, I pointed out that we were going to change or use a NAT network, and that was basically a DHCP protocol that provided us our IP addresses. That's dynamic. When the server or the router or whoever's in charge of our IP addresses hands out those IP addresses, and it will take any IP address that's given to us. But if we use a static, then we can identify the same or the specific MAC address and the IP address associated with it. And so we want to do that static. Now, the problem with a static IP address, obviously, is if I'm taking my laptop from work to home and they're on the same subnet, i.e., work for whatever you're using is using a 192 IP address, and it comes back into my house and I'm using a 192 and I use static, that could pose some problems, right? But if I use a static or static IP address and it doesn't, then we're good to go. Can't malware spoof a VPN, like can't an attacker pretend to be a VPN? They can, but it takes a lot more than that, right? We're talking at a whole nother level of malware usage than what we're discussing here. But there is malware that can provide that. A lot of times, if you would purposely download malware that says it's VPN, then you would basically be the VPN and using the malware as a VPN, where you purposely went out there and used a VPN, which was in fact not necessarily malware, but using a VPN provider or VPN service that wasn't necessarily legit, if that makes any sense. Okay. All right. So there we go. So that's the two basic principles on how to protect yourself from ARP. Would basically be using a VPN or a static IP, right? So we can actually create a static IP address if we wanted to by using the netsh command in Windows. So we're going to do that real quick, right? So I'm already in the command interface on a Windows 7 system. I'm going to do netsh. Let me type real quick, netsh. And it's going to say, hey, here's netsh, just like that. We see the little command right there. I know it's hard to see. I apologize. I wish I could blow this up some. Yeah, so we're going to type in netsh. And in order to create that static IP address, we're going to do IP. And we can see netsh IPsec. And then we're going to add. And then neighbor. Like so. It doesn't like my command. What did I screw up on? Let's see, netsh IPS. Oh. Interface. I forgot the interface command. So we're doing netsh interface and then IP, my apologies, and then add neighbor. And we can see here that it provides us a bunch of information. And from there, we're going to type in add neighbors Ethernet 2, and then 10.0.2.1, and we're going to provide the MAC address for that. All right, so where did I get this MAC address and where did I get all this other information? If I open up over here, we can see at the very, very beginning of our little system that we are on this MAC address right here. Where to go? Oh, it's on my point right here, 52.54.00.1235.00, which you'll notice that I matched up right here. And we press enter. And now we should have, oh, I have a volume or label syntax error. Give me one sec. Let me make sure that I type this in correctly. Where am I? IP config, da-da-da. I am sorry, Angel. I really am. I have a habit of going too fast. My apologies. I'm just going to get rid of this Ethernet 2. I'm going to change that to Ethernet 1. Will that let me? Nope. Let's just try Ethernet. All right, where am I finding my command? I am. Oh, 52 dot not 54. Thank you. Good catch. I apologize. Thank you for that. Aha. Good eyes. Thank you. 52-54, not 54-54. Thank you, sir. Let's try that. And of course, I need to change it back to Ethernet 2. There we go. Syntax error. Still giving me that syntax error. Give me 1 sec to figure out where I went wrong. There's always one thing. This is the thing with Linux and putting in command line interface. You got to be exact, because if you're not, it's going to come back to bite you. So where did I screw up? Let's see here. It's not showing an Ethernet connection. I wonder if that's my issue right there. You guys get to see me mess up and spelling neighbor. Am I spelling neighbor incorrectly? N-E-H. Diego's like, you need to learn how to spell. N-E-I-G-H. N-E-I-G-H. B-O-R-S. Nope. I believe that's correct. Okay, let's just try Ethernet. I don't think it's going to let me go. Nope. All right, so let's just get rid of Ethernet or neighbor altogether, or Ethernet. Let's see if that doesn't do it for me today. All right, let's see here. Neighbor. Oh, you know what? I wonder if I added an S by accident, and I wonder if that did it. Ethernet 2. Nope. Let's look. Let's do a real quick. Let me get into a new command. Let's do an IP config. Default gateway, link local network, LAN, media disconnected. Maybe it's. No, still not liking it. You know, you try to do these things beforehand to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and then ultimately you fail at some point in time. Okay, well, we're gonna move on. And the example shows IP and max double quotes. It happens, yeah. So we're gonna move on. But the command to change the static IP, I will update the slide once I figure out what in the world I did. You know what? I think I just figured out what I did wrong. Let's try this. Still messed up. All right, so I'm messing up. No big deal. Let's try. I just can't help myself. I've got to try one more. Still not doing it. All right, so we're gonna move on. So we can see that if you perform this command correctly, which I didn't happen to do, it would actually provide a static IP address and provide your ARP table with a static as well in here. So your 10.0.2.1 would equal the, instead of dynamic, it would equal a static, and that would stop you from being able to create an ARP attack or an ARP spoof against it, because that ARP table would be set in stone at that point. Okay. All right. So questions, concerns, all that. I know that I went a little bit fast. I'm glad that Catherine was able to provide you guys a slideshow. This is what ARP tables are, or ARP spoofing is. Questions? Local area connection. Yeah, I think you might be right, James. Let's see. I will try local area connection. Let's see if that doesn't work. Oh my gosh, James, you're smarter than I am. You know, sometimes, every once in a while. You got this, buddy. All right. So James figured it out. Thank you, sir. So if I do that ARP table now, we see right here, 10.0.2.1, 52, 54, just like we put it in there with a static IP address in there. All right, good job. All right, so that is one of the ways to do it. Okay, just a good Googler, superuser.com. Yeah, Google is my best friend, especially when I start to sweat in front of people. It's always a good thing, right? So that's ARP spoofing. This is one of the exercises we teach here at Flatiron when we go through a lot of our content, right? So we want to prove to you not only how to do the attacks, but also to defend against them. Most of the jobs in cybersecurity are on the defensive side. Very few people are going to be able to come out right out of any school, whether it's a university or out of a technical school or anything else like that, to become a direct penetration tester. But it's important to understand how the attacks are performed in order to see what the attacker is doing so you can defend against it. Because if we can identify how the attacks are actually performed, what the attacker is doing, it better provides us with a defensive knowledge that we need to counter those attacks. It's just like football or any other sport. The best defense is a good offense. Well, in this case, we need to understand the offense in order to have a better defense. So that's my presentation for today. Catherine, did you want to jump in?
I sure did. Just want to say thank you to you, Chester, and to everybody who zoomed in to join us tonight. Thank you for your patience while I learned how to PDF a document. Never done that before. Kidding. Anyway, if you have further questions about Flatiron, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to schedule a talk with our admissions team. As a reminder, you will receive a copy of tonight's presentation within 3 business days after the event. It will also be on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to see any previous events, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe. Again, thank you and have a great night.